Heel, and welcome back to the finale of Mega Man Xtreme. In this part we're going to be going through the Sigma stages of the hard mode of the game, and I did promise that throughout the hard mode I would be taking a look at the critical reception that Mega Man Xtreme's got over the years, because let's be real here, I've kind of exhausted everything I have to say about the game. I've exhausted all of my own critique here, because at the end of the day, it's a Mega Man game. It kind of does what it says on the tin. There's a few little quirks that it has that I've talked about, but let's have a little look at what other people have said about Mega Man Xtreme. So I have here the GameSpot review of Xtreme that was published in 2001. So this is an older review from back when the game first came out. This was written by the reviewer Frank Provo, and he gave the game a 6.4 out of 10. And he says, if you're a fan of the series, Xtreme's general gameplay, familiar environments and visual repertoire should be enough to warrant a purchase. Unfortunately, the game's difficulty level, combined with its numerous control and visual flaws, should serve as a point of caution for casual game players. If you're looking for bragging rights, however, showing off your defeat of the game is a good way to go, as Mega Man Xtreme is, without doubt, the most difficult and lengthy Mega Man title to date. And I'll say, from 2001, he's probably right, it is one of the more difficult games, but I feel like the difficulty there does kind of come down to the controls, which he did mention in the review. I kind of feel like this is a pretty fair way to go, and if you're playing this on hardware, then 6.4 out of 10, it does sound a bit low going by review standards, because the whole 7, 8, 9 being your full review scale, that's been around for a while. Being a bit on the lower side is fair when you consider how fiddly the controls can be. The fact that I had to rebind the controls in the emulator to make it more manageable, that is worth docking points away from the game for, I would say. That there was just Jumo. He's the only real difference in this take of the Sigma stages, aside from the boss rush, which we'll talk about when we get to it. In the standard difficulty you would fight Zane there, but you just fought Jumo. His boss strategy is pretty easy. You saw me take him down without too much trouble there. I have another review here that's also from back when the game first came out in 2001, and this one's from IGN, written by Mark Nix, who gave it an 8 out of 10, so that's quite a bit more generous than the 6.4 from GameSpot. The review says, compared to the previous Mega Man Game Boy games, Xtreme is eons better with Game Boy Color support. Capcom shipped this one still to be compatible with the Game Boy Pocket, but that's clearly just a side thought. On the old Game Boy, the game strobes like crazy, flickers wildly, and slows down with enemies on screen. It's playable, but because Capcom kept stages almost identical to the Super Nintendo version, there's often cases where the Game Boy Pocket can't handle the enemies. But not so at all with the Game Boy Color. It's perfectly smooth, always with flickers only in the effects, and features beautifully rendered recreations of the SNES game. There are some shortcuts made, the janky way the game pauses for the autosave is weak, and there are some effects, the explosion of the ground in the exposition scene, the raging lava in the Flame Stag stage, are done with pretty cheesy substitute effects likely to keep the Game Boy Pocket compatible, but it still works. Which is something that I hadn't actually thought about, because this game, while I am playing it here with the colour visuals and that, it's one of the games similar to what, say, Pokemon Gold and Silver did, where you could play it on a Game Boy if you wanted to, but judging by what this review is saying, it doesn't sound like it's a good idea to. And I will admit, this is something that I didn't think to try myself, so I will have to take that review's word for it. And I feel that it's odd that they still gave it an 8 out of 10 despite that. Although, to be fair, if it was marketed as a Game Boy Color game, then I would imagine most people would have been playing it on the Game Boy Color. I suppose it's a similar sort of thing going on to, like, say how some 3DS games now were clearly designed with the new 3DS in mind. And while there's only a handful of games that are outright exclusive to the new 3DS, there's games like, I think the Hyrule Warriors Legends port that they brought out, from what I've heard, apparently that runs terribly on the original 3DS. I'm quite fortunate in that I do have a new 3DS XL now, which I got as my recording setup one, but yeah, the original 3DS, it did become outdated hardware-wise. And to be fair, there are games that still run like shit on the new 3DS, like Pokemon Sun and Moon. If you get into any multi-battles, then it's kind of a disaster. If you play like the Battle Royale, where there's 4 trainers on screen at once with all their Pokemon, like that absolutely chucks. That is not a pleasant experience, even for a turn-based RPG. But this is the kind of game that I really wouldn't want to play with any more flickers. It's like, flickering has always been a Mega Man thing, if you think the NES Mega Man games, which I love them games to pieces. I'm a huge classic Mega Man fan, but they tested the NES. They really did test the NES. Kirby's Adventure also tested the NES a lot, because that has a lot of frame drops and whatnot, but the Mega Man flickering is quite infamous. But one thing I do want to mention about this particular review from Mark Nix is it seems like, in general, he's not so much a fan of the X series as a whole. What he goes on to say later in that review is, what doesn't work is what made Mega Man X a less likeable substitute for the original Mega Man in the first place. The stages in Xtreme were quite short, in keeping with a SNES game, although a few are breached some at the end, and rarely challenging. Instead, the boss rounds are the core of the gameplay, and with Xtreme's unbalanced design, that makes the game pretty rough. This wasn't a good thing for the average player. Part of the game's difficulty is just because the screen is smaller, making battles against large bosses much tougher in a confined space. Which, yeah, okay, fair enough, screen crunch, but then he goes on to elaborate on that, saying that's natural, but adding on to that, the required objects make the game a pain for those who just want to run in and gun on a Mega Man game. It used to be that the strategy of the game was deciding which weapon to use and when, but with Mega Man X, Capcom introduced the need to find sub-tanks to extend your life bar. Instead of being bonuses for hardcore players, it's the beginning players who don't know that they must explore for these power-ups that suffer, as they try to battle fierce bosses on slivers of health. These sub-tanks and Mega Man X body enhancement pods are often buried in obscure corners of the game world. Take a leap of faith off a cliff or scale 6 screens as sheer wall, and there's the body armour you need for hours now. Since there's no indicator to let players know when they've finished a stage 100%, most won't know that these bonuses are even there, and there's so few of them hidden that some gamers may never even guess that hidden stuff is even part of the gameplay. Without those obscure items, even the best gamers would find the further battles of the game a nightmare. And that's actually fair, to a certain degree. Like, I disagree on the principle of the power-ups being a problem in the first place, because I feel like the power-ups in Mega Man X encourage replayability. Because you have people who will just go and find whatever they find on their first playthrough and just give it their best shot there. But it also encourages you to replay with different challenge runs and whatnot. Like, you might do a challenge run where you don't get any upgrades, or challenge runs where you only get like you only use a certain kind of weapon. So I feel like that's the sort of thing that I appreciate preferring simplicity of classic Mega Man, but I don't find the enhancements a detraction either. I feel like what I agree with him on, though, is that there should be some kind of indicator as to whether you've got everything there is to get in the level, and I feel that's a quality of life feature that a more modern game taking on this particular structure would try to do. But yeah, I don't necessarily agree on the whole. I feel like there's merit to both this setup and classic Mega Man setup. Obviously it's going to be subjective which one you prefer, but I love Mega Man X and I love that format, so you know, you take it or leave it in that respect. But that's Woolgator taken down. The bosses, they have swapped them around from the last time we were here. In the normal mode there's one set of bosses that we saw in part 3, and in the hard mode there's the other 4 in the boss rush. So we just saw Woolgator go down, and the information I have about Woolgator is that he is 6'11" and he weighs 454 pounds. So he's a big lad, he's taller than me, he's a whole foot taller than me. So, you know, like, that's gotta be kind of intimidating. Like, I don't know off the top of my head how tall X is. So, like, you know, X is probably about man size, to be fair. So it's probably still quite a bit taller than X. But Armadillo here, the information I have, it seems to be in different units for the Mega Man X1 bosses, but Armadillo is 6.37 foot, apparently mistakenly shown as 6.36 foot in game, and he weighs 232 kilograms or 512 pounds. Moth here, he is 7 foot exactly, he weighs 282 pounds. So he's bigger but lighter, which works out given, you know, he's a flying enemy, he's got to be light on his feet. You can use the Armadillo weapon here to protect yourself, which comes in handy, I will say. I don't really remember much about Moth's fight in X2. I vaguely recall it being a similar kind of deal in the fact that he does the phases where, to start with, he'll do like the spinny attack with the debris, and then he does this phase where he flies all over the place. Obviously he would have a different weakness there, but right now just the rolling shield does the job nicely. That's him down, and we have just one more boss left to fight in this 3-match series, and that is Magnus Centipede, who seems to be the tallest of them all. He is 7'3", and he's actually even lighter than Moth. He weighs 273 pounds. But again, he's very mobile. He's got a sort of Boomer kind of pattern going on where he warps in and out, so I guess like that, it makes sense for him to be very light, even if he is the biggest fucker of them all. Out of these 4, I feel like I would say Armadillo probably has the coolest design, and that's cool in a dorky sort of way, because he does look a bit derpy. He arguably looks even more derpy in his Super Nintendo sprite than he did here, but I guess that is, in a way, that is my bias toward X1 coming through, because X1 has some of the most memorable Maverick designs of them all. Which in itself may be because X1 is my favourite Mega Man game, but still. Going back to reviews here, we had to look at a couple of reviews from when the game first came out, but I have another one here that's more recent from Nintendo Life. And this was written by Philip J. Reed in 2014, who gave it a 5 out of 10, so the lowest score we've seen out of these reviews. He says, Mega Man Xtreme is an interesting curio, but its ambitions exceed its abilities. As fantastic as a portable Mega Man X game sounds on paper, in practice, Xtreme is little more than a lesser imitation of the console originals. Little in the way of unique content, copious spelling errors, and inferior visuals and audio, as well as control issues, too frequent loading screens, and repetitious padding, mean that if you can download the first two X games to your Wii U or Wii instead, that's absolutely the way to go. This is a decently fun experience, but because it does almost nothing differently, it's also more than a little pointless. Mega Man Xtreme contains a lot of big ideas, but none of them are new, and all of them are better handled elsewhere. And again, I say this as someone who has mostly enjoyed my experience here. That is fair. I can see why someone who's looking back on this game would see it as a lesser experience, purely on the face value criticisms, even going on them before you get to, say, like the control issues and whatnot. I would say if you're looking for a Mega Man experience, a Mega Man X experience, then I would absolutely recommend X1 before anything else. No, this is me personally, that's where I would lean, but I would also say that if you enjoyed X1 and X2, this is a neat little alternate take on it. That's the kind of thing that I feel if this was your first experience with a Mega Man X game, it might actually put you off because there's a big learning curve with the controls. And just the gameplay style as a whole is just explained to the player so much better in the Super Nintendo games. But if you've enjoyed those games and you're going into it under the mindset of this is a Game Boy Color adaptation of these games that I enjoyed on the SNES, I feel like you would have a similar experience to what I did, where you can kind of see its shortcomings, but for what it is, you can enjoy it. Because I don't think this is a bad game. I feel like this is a game that has its reasons to like it and has its reasons to dislike it. And I will say I feel this game, it transposes its Super Nintendo gameplay elements better than it possibly could have. Like gameplay elements and presentation elements. The sprite work I think looks really nice. The music, I mentioned in earlier parts, some songs hold up well, some songs don't hold up too well. But even then, there are games that transpose the music from a console game to Game Boy a lot worse. If you've ever played the Game Boy version of the DuckTales game, you will know exactly what I mean. That is a horrible adaptation of the NES game's music. It's actually kind of painful as someone who really likes the Moon theme from that game to hear it completely butchered on the Game Boy. Especially given I am someone who, for the most part, really enjoys Game Boy music. I like the Game Boy sound font, but for some reason, something went wrong in the production of that game. It just doesn't sound right. But I would say this game holds up pretty well in terms of adapting its songs and adapting its visuals. If you're a newcomer, you won't appreciate this game, I don't feel. So, play Mega Man X, play Mega Man X2, and if you feel like you might enjoy a slightly different take on those games, then give this one a shot. Again, the thing that holds it back is the control, but nowadays if you play this, you're going to be emulating it. If you play this on a Game Boy or Game Boy Color, they're absolutely valid things to hold against it, but play this on an emulator. You're going to do that anyway these days. I know you will. But with Sigma taken down there, I think that's pretty much a wrap on this game. We just conclude the story here, but I feel like I should say this game, I enjoy playing it. I do realise this playthrough has taken a lot longer than it probably should have, and that's something I do aim to work on next year. It's a bit of a New Year's resolution I'm setting myself to try and keep a more consistent release schedule once the games are started. There might be big breaks between each LP, but I do want to keep things moving a lot better than I have this year, because this playthrough has been a bit of a wall for me, which I'll talk more about most likely in my end of year video. But I hope that if you've stuck around for this playthrough, you've enjoyed what I've brought to the table regardless, and maybe I've introduced you to a new spin-off of a classic game that you might enjoy. Maybe you've watched this and thought, not for me, that's fair enough. But, ladies and gentlemen, I've been the Flameclaw, and this has been Mega Man Xtreme. I'll see you next time for another playthrough.